Hi, in this video I want to try to demonstrate some techniques to replace bushings in a Hermle 1161 853 grandfather clock movement. There's two cams that control the chimes. This one here, there's a through shaft that goes to the plate, and this one that stops the cycle, and that has another through shaft. Now as well, there's a small cam on a shaft right here that controls the strike. And those three areas especially wear to the point where there's there's much too much slop, and it caused the chime mechanism not to spin up when the levers released it, and it was supposed to start spinning and initiate a chime sequence. With the clock still partially assembled, you can actually get a sense of which bushings need replacement and which don't. Let's see if I can show you how bad the wear is. Yeah, see, that should not wiggle like that. It's causing various gears to not mesh properly. So the first thing I'm going to do here is remove the nuts that will allow me to take these plates apart. Now we can separate the plates. This shaft, of course, is connected with a little spring, which I will remove, and we can see the gearing that we're going to affect. It will be this one and this one, and the next one is over here. I can find it. I believe it's this one. I like to keep my gear trains separate from each other. I think it makes it a little easier when you go to reassemble the clock. So that, as you can see up here, I have these little, Tupperware sandwich boxes, and I'll put all the chime gearing in here, the going train in here, the strike train in here, and I actually have another one that I use. These are all the levers that came off the front of the unit, and the suspension spring, and I like to keep my small pieces in these little NyQuil cups, keep them separate. I even made little dividers for my ultrasonic cleaner so that I can keep the gears separated from each other when cleaning. It just makes it a little easier when you go to reassemble things. So I'm down to just a few gears left now, the ones of interest to me, and I just left this one in to show that it interferes with this a little bit. But you can see that it's fairly well behaved, and it rotates pretty much in a circle, and there's no extreme lean to it. So the bushing is not in bad shape at all on this one. But if you look at, for instance, this guy, which is connected to the shaft that the little pallet turns on, that was from the strike movement, this one, it does not rotate in a circle. I'm trying to rotate it in a circle, and you can see that it's moving back and forth, and that shows extreme wear, as does this, as actually does the one that has the other cam. It's not too bad, but it's showing, it's not precessing in a circle, it's showing an oblong. So I'm going to end up replacing the bushings on that, and probably will do both sides. So in order to remove the cams from the chime mechanism, you'll see that each cam has two set screws. They're on opposite sides. And you loosen the set screws, and then you carefully work that off the shaft that it was on. But it may be a little difficult to get off, and the reason for that is that those set screws will dig into the shaft, and they'll make a little impression in the shaft, which raises some metal. So before you try to size for bushings, it's important that you carefully smooth those shafts back out to remove that burr that's on them. And that needs to be done for both of the gears associated, both of the shafts associated with the chime mechanism. but it's not necessary for the strike because that pallet is a slip fit and the shaft is slightly conical there, and there's no set screw involved on that gear. So the chime cams were from this in this area. There's when you inspect them closely, let's see, let me find this one. What you'll see is that the center, it's very important to find the center of the original hole. And you can see this one's slightly oblong, and the wear on this one is along. If you bore out a hole for the bushing, you ream it out. If it's off center, you're kind of done unless you want to recenter it somehow, drilling a hole bigger, and then you'll probably have to make your own bushing for it at that point. So you don't want to do that. You want to be very accurate. And the tolerances here are very tiny, few thousandths that the thing wore. I will take a look and make a judgment on how centered this original hole is to the oil sink around it. And if I judge that it looks like it was quite centered to begin with, then what I will end up doing is operating and using that oil sink as a visual reference to find out if I am in the correct center. Because the first thing you want to do is to use a very fine needle file, and you need to start filing across from where the original wear was, and then ultimately round that hole back out so that your reamer will find the true center of what was originally the true center. So I put the movement back together with only the gears that I'm concerned about so that I can take a look to see what their pivots look like. And I've identified all the areas I want to add bushings. So to identify them to myself so I don't get the wrong ones, I put these little pieces of masking tape basically, and essentially I'm pointing to the edge where the wear is closest, so that I can quickly tell looking at it what's going on. And you can see I've got 3 on the front and 3 on the back. So the next step is to file the oblong hole into something that's round again, with its center being where the original center was. Now you can use any magnification technique that's available to you, visors, whatever, to do this. I happen to use this binocular microscope because I have it, and I found that it allows me to work very close and keep my tolerances tight. So what I've done here, I've mounted the binocular microscope on a board that has a hole in it down below. And you can see I've got a number 3 needle file sticking up through that hole, going through where I'm going to file away for the pivot for the bushing to be received. So that when I first set up, I make sure that hole is centered in the binocular microscope, and then I position the plate to center it in the binocular microscope. Unfortunately, I don't think I can get you in to see, but let's take a look if there's any way I can do this. I don't know if you can see or not, but there is, when you look through the microscope, you can really tell that that file is in the center, and off to the left-hand side, you can see where the wear is. So, and I can also tell from that the original center was quite well centered in the oil sink, which helps me immensely to get the enlarged hole to be in the right position. So what I do at this point is while looking through, I just simply work on this filing. First I file in the opposite side from the wear until things look symmetric. And once I've gotten that done, then I basically go along the edges and try to make that hole completely round by filing away everything out to where the original wear was. And periodically in this method I have to stop and I have to clear the chips because they obscure what I'm doing. And then the fun part is getting the needle file back where it's supposed to be, which is a little tricky, but not too bad. And this takes some time, but the hole in the piece of wood forces my needle file to be straight, which seems to me would be very important for this operation. So I'm not going to film the whole thing, but you get the idea. When I'm done, I'll actually have the needle file up there and I'll rotate it to make sure everything is nice and round. Now the needle file is tapered, but it doesn't really matter because any plane that you would cut away through the plate, you would see a circular hole, which means that the when I ream it, the reamer will self-center no matter how deep it is in that hole, even if the hole is not perfectly cylindrical. Stephen Conover, in his books and most of the forums you look at, will tell you that before you try sizing bushings for something you're going to rebush, that you should polish all the pinions and the arbors first. And I'm actually not going to do that, and the reason is that in these Hermle movements from the early 80s, these arbors are a fairly soft steel apparently, and what they do is they chrome plate them, and the chromium plating is extremely hard. If I try to polish it, I'm likely to mess up that chrome plating, and if that flakes off, then I'm really in trouble, and the thing is just going to act like a rasp file and file back through the new bushings. I've inspected these pretty closely, and they actually look like they're in good shape. And I'm taking an additional measure on the arbors where they come through the plates. I'm actually going to install bushings that are taller than the plates are thick and have them stand proud probably about 1 millimeter so that they will be contacting these arbors in an area that's never been worn before in case there is any roughness. You know, they don't want them chewing their way through the new bushings. It's a little controversial, but others have tried it with good luck, and I feel that it's probably a good solution. So we're ready to choose our bushing sizes and get all lined up here. Now I'm replacing 6 bushings in this movement. These 3 gears are going to have their bushings replaced, the 3 arbors. They're all 3 through arbors because beyond the front plate they have cams, these chime cams over here and the strike cam here. We have very small pinions on the backs of these 2 because they terminate at the back plate, but this arbor goes through the back plate and you mount the gear on that actually drives the little mechanism that's kind of the music box roll. So I have my assortments of bushings. These are KWM bushings. And if you buy a KWM bushing tool, it actually comes with a card that's got mounted in it all the different size bushings. I didn't have one. I looked for those on the internet. They were very expensive. So I made one. I just took a piece of material and planted the bushings in them. I kind of just scanned and copied the labeling on these assortments, put them in. I made sure that when I did that, they made these flush with this front face and made sure the oil sinks on the other side. But I also drilled each out a bit larger, larger holes in the back so that if it's a through shaft and I'm trying to tell what the fit is, that's not constricting it in the back. So basically what I would do here would be to take one of the arbors, and the first thing I'll do is measure where I want the bushing to go. In this case, it says 1.46 millimeters. If I then had copied this sheet, got this off the internet, table of KWM bushings, and it lists everything, and I can look up 1.46. Over here I see 1.45 to 1.5 millimeters, and to get the right fit, you'd expect a bore in the bushing of 1.6. So I go to this and I find that, okay, here's a 1.6 millimeter over here. And I can put that in and I can check what's the play in this thing. Rule of thumb is 5 degrees. Actually, on my through bushings, I am having them standing proud from the plate a little bit because this movement has problems with those wearing out. That's a little controversial, but I've done it on another movement, had great success with it. So I want a little less than 5 degrees because if the bushing is longer, the same internal diameter as you lengthen that bushing will cause less rock side to side. So how do I measure that 5 degrees? Well, I made up a little, just a little assistance here, and I've got a little scale on it, and I made the height be the same as the thickness between the plates here, so I can actually wobble this back and forth, and I'm happy with what I see in terms of the play in that bushing. If I would try it in another one that's larger open, I can see that I get excessive play. So once I'm happy with that fit, then what I actually do is I go and I grab the bushing out of my assortment. I actually make a tick mark so that I know how many bushings are gone out of that particular bin. And I decided in order to keep these straight, I actually took an egg crate, a dozen eggs, and I consider this the front plate and that the back plate, and I've put the corresponding bushings in the spots, and left to right corresponds with these gears left to right, so that I don't accidentally put the wrong bushing in the plate. Don't want to do that. So at this point, I've got all the bushings assigned and we're ready to go. Okay, so the next step is to actually use the reamers to ream out the holes that we're going to be putting the bushings in. I'm going to do this with a drill press. Now, this is a standard drill press, but I've geared it down. Normally, you're changing the belt to change speeds. I've hooked it up to a sewing machine motor, and in fact, it's easy for me to swap out the gearing with this sewing machine motor. If I just take off this clamp, I just remove this whole assembly and belt, and I can put on the normal belt that goes to the motor itself. So I haven't sacrificed the functionality of the drill press at all. And this allows me some very smooth speed control. So I can do this with very slow speed, and in fact, if I really want to gear it down, I just give a little resistance to this. And then I can let it go whatever speed I like. And that'll get me from about here up Now, in order to really precisely control the piece, I actually already had this XY table available, and it was the kind of thing you would use in a milling machine, but it allows me to get really nicely controlled distancing, positioning for this thing. And you see I've made a little stand. It had to be tall enough to clear anything under the plate. Whoop. Has to be able to clear this sort of thing. And the idea is I put it in about where it needs to go, and then I simply take another clamp once I'm close, and I just provide a little extra. I'm trying to do this one-handed because right now I'm holding the camera. Provide a little extra squeeze on that thing, and that's not going anywhere. So, and then from there I can wheel it into where I need to put it. Now you'll see I've also marked the holes that I'm going to ream, and I have added some, it's pretty tough to see it, but I penned in the diameter of the reamers that I'm going to use. In this case, the back plate, it's a 1.8 millimeter, 1.8 millimeter, 3.5 millimeter that a shaft will come through. I also have a support that I'll place underneath, and normally I'll put the side with the hole drilled in it, and then I stick another piece that just fell on the floor under it to give it a lot of support so that the plate doesn't try to sag. So let's take a look at the reamers and the tools that I'll be using. Now these are KWM tools. They're actually made to fit into a little handle. I made these little cases for them because I wanted to keep them more organized. A set of 5 reamers. I've written down the diameters of the reamers. So we got 1.2, 1.8, 2.7, 3.5, and 5.9. They're essentially like cones that have been half of them sliced away. So they're very nice cutters. I think this set with its handle and was somewhere around $97. So another couple of items here. This one is supposed to be for chamfering, and this is a centering bit that I've used to align everything up. Now I'm using something that's, with this XY table, I can really precisely align these holes so that as soon as I come down, everything's going to drill absolutely perfect. But in reality, if you've done a good job of filing these holes back round, I've seen several instances where people are hand holding the plate and getting it close, and depending on the self-centering that reamer is going to do when it hits the hole. I'd rather use overkill. Since I had this piece of equipment, I'd rather do some overkill here than what I've seen where somebody sets this on a mason jar and just holds it while they bring down a drill press. So however you're able to do this, I think you're okay doing a handhold. The advantage you have using something like a drill press, or if you can afford a bushing machine, that's great. But this will keep things nice and straight, and that's really critical. Not only that, but this has very little run out, and I've actually marked it so that every time I'll put the centering bit in right now. Every time I put the bit in, there's a little stub sticking out, and that usually keys into the handle that you get with it. But what I do is I bring the jaws on the 3-jaw chuck down until they're just wide enough to fit this in, and I can actually hand tighten it. But I've also marked on the chuck a position so that every time I chuck this up or chuck up one of these actual reamers, they're always in the same position. So then what I can do is go in here, and actually what I've also done, I don't know if you can see it up here, I can move this. I have moved one of the screws on the on this adjustment so that if I bring this down, I can then bring this up and keep the chuck from retracting again, and that allows me to get right in here very close to the plate, and I can bring that nut up so that now I can dial my way over and really zero in on the position of this thing. Once I feel that I've got the position perfect, then I simply take this bit out and I put the appropriate reamer in. Okay, I've got the 1.8 millimeter reamer in place. Now I have found almost no information about the wisdom of using cutting fluid. I think a lot of people do this dry, but because these were expensive, I am just going to lightly coat some cutting fluid on this reamer. I'm just using a Castrol product, which is really good stuff, and there's many lubricants you can use as cutting fluid. Okay, so let me get my proper glasses on here, and I'm ready to start reaming. And I'm going to bring this down until I am, let's see where I can point this out. This shoulder here should be just the right diameter. Okay. And the hole is reamed. It should be just the right diameter. Now, once I'm done reaming, I will put the chamfering bit in the handle, and I will hold it very straight and very lightly chamfer the inside plate holes, because that's the direction I will be inserting these bushings into. And since the oil sink goes first, it's important to have a nice edge for it. So we're ready to press in the bushing. Always press it in from the inside surface of the plate, because the bushings are slightly tapered, and it's important that you want the oil sink side down so that it ends up at the outside of the plate. Now, I've peeled these little pieces of tape back, my indicators, and I'm just simply using, this is actually something similar to this bit, which is it's for the milling machine, and I've just put it in backwards. I just want a nice flat arbor sticking down, and I end up using this like an arbor press. In order to properly position the bushing over the hole that it's going in, I've made up just a little piece of plastic that I have drilled a hole in. You can see I've got three different size holes in this for the three different bushing sizes I've been dealing with. I'm going to demonstrate on the larger bushing because it's easier to see. And again, making sure the oil sink is on the downward
side of this. This allows me to position myself over that hole, and when I press, I can feel that bushing going in just slightly. So now I hold that there for it to be in position. Press down here enough that I have felt the bushing going in a little bit, and then I can take this piece off. Now that bushing is precisely positioned, and I can end up going all the way down, making sure that I am nice and flush. So what I end up with here is the nice, flat, already chamfered surface, really nice and even with this plate. And that's important. If it's standing proud on the inside of the plate, you won't get enough shake, so there won't be quite enough play in the gear, and it may end up binding and causing a problem when you put this thing back together. So now I'm going to try to match up the original oil sinks, because the bushings have their own little tiny oil sinks, but they aren't quite as big as the ones that were here originally. So I put in this, it's an 1/8 inch round milling bit, and I'm going to come down here and just sort of eyeball it and try to very, very accurately line this thing up so that it comes in there just perfect, and just get a little divot in there. And that just about matches now. So I realize you won't be able to see that too easily, but boy, from this side you can't even tell that that bushing is there. So because they have through shafts going in through them, I mentioned that I was leaving a couple of these bushings standing proud so that they would give a little more rear surface, and they would be contacting the shaft where it has never been worn. But I don't want it quite this high, and I also want to machine the oil sink a little wider, because this is chamfered on its outside. That limits the diameter of that oil sink. So I put in a wider milling bit, round head again, and I made a little shim that I can place over this, and I will take off this material right down to that shim, and that will leave me just about 1 millimeter sticking up, and that's what I want. Adjust my centering just slightly here. So that leaves me with a really nice wide oil sink. It's a little sharp on the edge. I'll smooth that slightly, but it doesn't really matter because that is underneath a cam, and in fact there's a couple of millimeters clearance between it and the cam, and so you'll never get anywhere near it to cut yourself on the thing, but it maximizes the oil sink. So the bushings are pretty much done. Now at this point, if you have, well, what you want to do is you want to check the fit on all these just to make sure that nothing's changed, and I have done that, and I'm very happy with the range. The 5 degrees looks really good. Otherwise, if it's too tight, a lot of people choose bushings, the first bushing that slides over the arbor and or the pinion. And in that case, you'll have to go in with these broaches. There's a series of broaches. There are these 5-sided files. They go from very fine to pretty good diameter, and they're slightly tapered. And you would need to broach open these holes. To do that, you've got to make sure you hold the broach very, very vertical when you go in there, and lightly turn it, and do it from both sides, because you're going to end up, instead of a cylindrical hole, you'll have a slightly tapered hole. If you do it from both sides, the high spot is in the middle and it minimizes the taper. So, but I don't have to do that because of the way we used the card in the first place to get the right internal diameter hole. And that gives me a slight advantage because now these holes are all cylindrical instead of being slightly tapered. But we're done with that bushing job, and it may be very difficult for you to see where these bushings are, especially with this camera. But after having put in the oil sinks, we've got one there, we've got one there, and then this is the one that is standing a bit proud. And when you inspect them, see, I don't know if I can get this. Let's see if I can get that to look like, there we go. You can see the oil sink in the plate. And from this side of the plate, it'd be very difficult to tell where the bushings are. On this side of the plate, they're nice and flat. If you want to touch up the chamfer a little, the chamfer bit is too big to work on these. So what I do is I simply take this little Dremel bit, put it in, hold it straight, and twirl it a little bit just to make sure that chamfer's nice and smooth. So that's pretty much it. The next step is to reassemble the clock and lubricate it. So before I put the entire assembly together, the entire movement, I thought it would be wise to just put in the gears that I've rebushed. So I've got them in, and you can see these turn nice and freely, and there's no oil yet. And this one also goes nice and freely. Now, when I first put this together, I found that this gear was not turning as freely as it should, and when I inspected things, I found that there was a slight burr that was set up when I cut in the heat sinks. So I went in with a broach and just very lightly broached those holes back out. So it's important to inspect all the work after you've done it. Make sure everything appears to be running smoothly, and then you're okay. Because it's much better at this stage to have to address something than when you get the whole thing together. Well, the movement's all put back together, and I've got everything resynchronized and adjusted, and it seems to be working beautifully. The original symptom was that the chime was not working. The little chime cam here would not spin when the lever's lifted. I'll crank it around to the hour. Now, this is not the minute hand for this particular movement, so it's not going to point to 12 when this thing goes off. So we're all done.